Picture this. A successful marketing executive, 8 months pregnant, stands confidently in a boardroom presenting quarterly results to her company's investors and senior staff. She's married to the CEO, living what appears to be the perfect life, but in the next 60 seconds, everything will shatter. Her husband will do something so shocking, so unthinkable in front of 23 witnesses that it will trigger a chain of events leading to his complete destruction. What started as a routine business presentation became the moment that exposed a dangerous pattern of abuse and set in motion the most devastating corporate takedown you've ever heard. A venture capitalist father, a sealed criminal past, hidden financial fraud, and a pregnant woman who refused to stay silent. This isn't just a story about domestic violence, it's about power, justice, and how one moment of uncontrolled rage can unravel an entire empire. By the end of this tale, a tech CEO worth millions will lose everything: his company, his freedom, his reputation, and his family. The question isn't whether justice was served, it's whether you're ready to witness how quickly the powerful can fall when their masks finally slip. The sound of skin hitting skin echoed through the executive conference room as 23 employees watched their CEO strike his pregnant wife. Rebecca Sullivan stood frozen, her hand instinctively moving to her reddened cheek. 8 months pregnant with a belly that strained against her navy blazer. She had been presenting the quarterly marketing results with her usual professional confidence. The presentation had been going perfectly until her husband, Daniel Morrison, interrupted. "You don't know what you're talking about." Daniel had snapped from his position at the head of the polished mahogany table. His face was flushed red, veins visible at his temples. Maybe pregnancy brain is real after all. The comment had stung, but Rebecca had fired back professionally. The data clearly shows our customer acquisition costs have increased by 37% this quarter. We need to pivot our strategy. "Don't lecture me about my own company," Daniel had snarled, rising from his chair. That's when it happened. In front of the board of directors, the senior management team, and key investors, Daniel Morrison struck his pregnant wife across the face. The silence that followed was deafening. 23 pairs of eyes stared in shock. Rebecca touched her cheek, feeling the heat radiating from where his palm had connected. Her wedding ring caught the light from the conference room's floor-to-ceiling windows. Marcus Webb, the company's head of security, immediately stepped forward. A former military man in his mid-40s. Marcus had witnessed plenty of conflicts, but never anything like this. "Sir, I need you to step away from Mrs. Morrison," he said, his voice steady but firm. Daniel seemed to realize what he had done, but instead of apologizing, he doubled down. "She's my wife. This is my company. You all work for me." Rebecca looked around the room at faces she had known for 3 years. Jessica Clark, her best friend and fellow marketing director, looked horrified. Thomas Brighton, Daniel's business partner, stared at his hands. The other employees seemed frozen, unsure how to react to such an unprecedented situation. "The meeting is over," Rebecca said quietly, her voice remarkably steady despite the trembling in her hands. She gathered her presentation materials with as much dignity as she could muster and walked toward the door. "Rebecca, wait," Daniel called after her, his tone suddenly desperate. "Let's discuss this privately." She turned back to face him one last time. "There's nothing to discuss. Daniel, you just ended our marriage in front of everyone we work with." The elevator ride to the parking garage felt endless. Rebecca's reflection in the polished steel doors showed a successful marketing executive, 8 months pregnant, with a red handprint on her face. She thought about how she would explain this to her parents, to her unborn daughter, to herself. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Are you okay? Should I call someone?" Rebecca typed back, "Going home. Marcus called HR and police. We'll call you later." As she drove through downtown traffic, Rebecca's mind raced. 3 years of marriage, 5 years together total, and it had come to this. She had defended Daniel to friends who worried about his controlling behavior. She had made excuses when he criticized her in public, but this was different. This was unforgivable. Her phone rang as she pulled into their driveway. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. She declined the call. It rang again immediately. And again. Finally, she answered. "What? Baby, I'm so sorry." The stress of the IPO, the board pressure, the competition from TechFlow. "I just snapped." You know I didn't mean it. You hit me, Daniel, in front of everyone. While I'm carrying your child, it was a mistake, a terrible mistake. We can work through this. We always do. Rebecca looked at their house, a beautiful Tudor-style home in an upscale neighborhood. They had picked it out together 2 years ago, dreaming of filling it with children and laughter. Now it felt like a prison. I need space to think, she said. Don't do anything rash, Rebecca. Think about what this could do to the company, to our future. You should have thought about that before you hit me. She hung up and sat in her car, hands shaking as she stared at the house that no longer felt like home. Rebecca sat in her car for 20 minutes before finding the courage to go inside. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from colleagues, but she ignored them all except one from Jessica. Becca, everyone's talking. Marcus already called HR and the police. Take care of yourself. The house felt different as she walked through the front door. The hardwood floors that had once felt warm and welcoming now seemed cold. The family photos on the mantel mocked her with their images of happier times. She knew she needed to tell her parents, but the thought filled her with dread. William Sullivan was not just her father. He was one of the most powerful venture capitalists in the city. Sullivan Capital Partners had been instrumental in funding Morrison Tech's early rounds. Her father had believed in Daniel's vision, had trusted him with millions of dollars in investment. More importantly, her father had trusted Daniel with his daughter. Rebecca poured herself a glass of water and sat at the kitchen island, her hands still trembling slightly. She pulled up her father's contact information and hesitated. Once she made this call, there would be no going back. Her father was protective, influential, and had the resources to make Daniel's life very difficult. The phone rang 3 times before William Sullivan answered. "Hello, sweetheart. How did the quarterly presentation go?" His warm voice almost broke her resolve. "Dad, something happened today." The tone in her voice immediately put him on alert. "What's wrong?" "Daniel hit me. At the office. During the all-hands meeting. In front of everyone." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for what felt like an eternity. When her father finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. Gone was the warm, paternal tone. In its place was something cold and calculating. "Sweetheart, where are you right now?" "I'm at home, but Dad, I don't think I can stay here." "You won't have to. Is he there with you?" "No, he's still at the office dealing with the fallout." "Good, don't let him in when he gets home. I'm going to put your mother on the phone." Patricia Sullivan's voice came through the speaker, filled with concern and determination. "Rebecca, honey, pack a bag. I'm coming to get you right now." "Mom, I can drive myself." "Absolutely not. You're 8 months pregnant, and you've just been through a trauma. I'll be there in 20 minutes. After hanging up, Rebecca sat in the quiet kitchen and tried to process what had just happened. Her life had changed irrevocably in the span of a few hours. This morning she had been a successful marketing executive married to a promising tech CEO. Now she was a victim of domestic violence, 8 months pregnant, preparing to leave her home. Meanwhile, across town at Sullivan Capital Partners, William Sullivan was taking action. He canceled his afternoon meetings and called his assistant. "Get me everything on Morrison Tech. Every contract, every clause, every signature. I want to know exactly what leverage we have." "Sir, is everything all right?" "My daughter was just assaulted by her husband. Everything is very much not all right." William opened his computer and began reviewing the files on Morrison Tech. Sullivan Capital Partners owned 43% of the company through their Series A and Series B investments. More importantly, the funding agreements contained specific performance clauses tied to executive conduct and company reputation. His phone buzzed with a call from his longtime friend and business partner, Robert Chen. "William, I just heard something disturbing from a contact at Morrison Tech. Is Rebecca okay?" "She will be, but Daniel Morrison just made the biggest mistake of his life." "What do you need?" "I need you to quietly reach out to our contacts at Morrison Tech's other investor firms. I have a feeling they're going to be very interested in what happened in that conference room today." Back at the house, Rebecca packed a bag with shaking hands. She included comfortable clothes, her laptop, important documents, and the baby clothes she had been collecting. Each item felt like a small goodbye to the life she had built. Daniel's key turned in the front door just as she was zipping up her suitcase. "Rebecca," he called out, "where are you? We need to talk about this." She met him in the living room, her packed bag visible behind her. "Baby, please don't overreact," Daniel said, his voice taking on the pleading tone she had heard so many times before. "I know what I did was wrong, but we can work through this. Think about the company. Think about our future. Think about the baby." "I am thinking about the baby," Rebecca replied. "That's exactly why I'm leaving. You can't just walk away from our marriage because of one mistake." "One mistake," Rebecca's voice rose slightly. "Daniel, you hit me in front of our entire company. This wasn't a mistake. This was who you really are when you don't get your way." The sound of a car in the driveway interrupted them. Patricia Sullivan's voice called out from the front door. "Rebecca, it's Mom." Daniel's face darkened. "You called your parents. Do you have any idea what this could do to the company? Your father controls our largest investment round." "You should have thought about that before you hit me." Patricia Sullivan entered the living room like a force of nature. At 55, she was an elegant woman with steel in her spine and fire in her eyes when her family was threatened. "Daniel," she said curtly, "Mrs. Sullivan, I'm glad you're here. Maybe you can talk some sense into Rebecca. This is all a misunderstanding that got blown out of proportion." Patricia looked at the fading red mark on her daughter's cheek, and her expression hardened. "The only misunderstanding here is your belief that you can lay hands on my daughter and face no consequences. I never meant to hurt her. The stress of running a company, the pressure from investors, the upcoming IPO, I just lost control for a moment. And that's exactly why she's leaving with me," Patricia said firmly. "Rebecca, is that your bag?" As they prepared to leave, Daniel made one final plea. "Rebecca, if you do this, if you make this public, it will destroy everything we've built together. Think about the employees who depend on Morrison Tech. Think about the investors who trusted us. Think about our future." Rebecca paused at the door and looked back at the man she had married. "I did think about our future, Daniel. That's why I'm protecting it." The drive to her parents' house passed in relative silence. Patricia occasionally reached over to squeeze her daughter's hand, providing comfort without pressure to talk. "Your father is handling the business side of things," Patricia finally said as they pulled into the familiar driveway. "You don't need to worry about anything except taking care of yourself and the baby." "What do you mean, handling the business side?" Patricia's smile was grim. "Your father didn't build Sullivan Capital Partners by being naive about human nature. He's very good at protecting his investments. And you, my dear, are his most important investment of all." As they walked into the house where Rebecca had grown up, she felt a mixture of safety and sadness. She was home, but not by choice. She was protected, but only because she needed protection from the man she had promised to love forever. Her phone buzzed with another call from Daniel. This time, she turned it off completely. Patricia Sullivan moved through the house with military precision, setting up the guest room that had been Rebecca's childhood bedroom. She pulled fresh linens from the closet and arranged pregnancy pillows on the bed, while Rebecca sat in the window seat, staring out at the garden where she had played as a child. "This feels surreal," Rebecca said quietly. "This morning I was presenting quarterly results. Tonight I'm hiding in my childhood bedroom." "You're not hiding," Patricia corrected firmly. "You're regrouping. There's a significant difference." Downstairs, William Sullivan was convening an emergency meeting via video conference. His home office, with its dark wood paneling and wall of law books, had been the site of many important business decisions over the years. Tonight, it would host the most personal one of his career. Sarah Coleman appeared on the large monitor, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. At 52, she was one of the most respected divorce attorneys in the state, known for her methodical approach and devastating courtroom presence. "William, I've reviewed the initial information you sent over," Sarah said. "Before we proceed, I need to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. This isn't just a divorce case. Given the corporate connections and the public nature of the assault, we're looking at multiple legal fronts." "What do you need from us?" William asked. "First, documentation, the security footage, witness statements, medical records documenting any injuries. Second, we need to move fast on protective measures, restraining orders, custody protections, financial safeguards. Third, we need to prepare for Daniel's counter strategy. Men like him don't go quietly. Dr. Robert Mitchell, the family's longtime physician, joined the call from his office. I can see Rebecca tomorrow morning for a complete examination. We'll document any physical trauma and assess the stress impact on her pregnancy. Given that she's at 32 weeks, we need to monitor carefully for any signs of preterm labor. William's business attorney, James Harrison, appeared on screen from his downtown office. William, I've been reviewing the Morrison Tech investment agreements. The conduct clauses are actually quite comprehensive. If Daniel's behavior reflects poorly on the company or violates professional standards, we have grounds to trigger several protective provisions. What kind of provisions? William asked. Forced buyouts, management restructuring, even dissolution of partnership agreements. The key is proving that his actions constitute a material breach of his fiduciary duties. Upstairs, Rebecca had finally broken down in her mother's arms. 3 years of marriage, 5 years of relationship, and it had come to this. She thought about all the small warning signs she had ignored, all the times she had made excuses for Daniel's behavior. I defended him to everyone, she sobbed. When Jessica said he was controlling, when Dad expressed concerns about his temper, when Thomas mentioned his drinking, I always had an explanation. Patricia stroked her daughter's hair. Honey, you couldn't have known he would escalate to physical violence. Emotional manipulation is designed to make you doubt your own perceptions. But the signs were there. He isolated me from friends, criticized my work in front of colleagues, made financial decisions without consulting me. I was so focused on being a supportive wife that I lost myself completely. That's not your fault. That's what abusers do. They systematically break down your confidence and support systems until you feel completely dependent on them. Rebecca's phone, which she had turned back on to coordinate with her parents, buzzed with a text from Jessica. Daniel left the office an hour ago. He looked furious. Are you somewhere safe? She showed the message to her mother, who immediately called down to William. We need to accelerate our timeline, Patricia said. Daniel is not handling this well. Downstairs, William was already 3 steps ahead. James, I want you to file for an emergency restraining order first thing tomorrow morning. Sarah, begin preparation for divorce proceedings. Dr. Mitchell, can you see Rebecca at 7 a.m.? Of course, Dr. Mitchell replied. I'll also refer her to Dr. Amanda Foster, our best maternal fetal medicine specialist. She'll want to monitor the pregnancy closely given the stress factors. Sarah Coleman leaned forward on the screen. William, there's something else you should know. I've been doing some preliminary research on Daniel Morrison's background. His first marriage ended in divorce 6 years ago, and while the records are sealed, I have contacts who might be able to provide some insight. What kind of insight? The kind that establishes patterns of behavior. If Daniel has a history of domestic violence, it strengthens Rebecca's case significantly and could be crucial in custody proceedings. William's expression hardened. Do whatever you need to do. Cost is not a factor. I'll make some calls tonight. These things move faster when someone with your reputation is asking the questions. The video conference continued for another hour, covering financial strategies, corporate implications, and legal timelines. By the time they signed off, Rebecca's support team had a comprehensive plan in place. Upstairs, Rebecca was reviewing the quarterly marketing report she had been presenting when Daniel hit her. The irony wasn't lost on her that the data clearly showed Morrison Tech's declining performance, information that might have been useful in the divorce proceedings. Mom, she called out, can you ask Dad to come up here? I have some information that might be relevant. William appeared in the doorway, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled from the stress of the evening. How are you holding up, sweetheart? I'll survive, but Dad, I think there's something you should know about Morrison Tech's financials. The numbers I was presenting today show some concerning trends that Daniel has been hiding from the board. She showed him the data on her laptop: declining customer acquisition, increasing churn rates, and significant cash flow problems that weren't reflected in the reports Daniel had been giving investors. William studied the numbers carefully. This shows the company is in much worse shape than our quarterly reports indicated. Daniel has been cooking the books to make things look better than they are. I discovered it while preparing the presentation, which is why I was recommending the strategy pivot. He knew I was about to expose the real state of the company. That explains his extreme reaction, William mused. He wasn't just angry about being contradicted. He was panicking about being exposed. There's more, Rebecca continued. I think he's been siphoning money into personal accounts. There are several expense categories that don't add up, and I found payments to companies I've never heard of. William's business instincts kicked into high gear. Rebecca, I need you to document everything you know about these financial irregularities. This could be the leverage we need to protect you and remove Daniel from the company entirely. Is that what you want to do? Destroy his company? William sat on the edge of the bed and took his daughter's hand. Sweetheart, I want to protect you and my granddaughter. If that means destroying Daniel Morrison's company, then that's exactly what I'll do. For the first time since the incident, Rebecca felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't facing this alone. She had resources, support, and now, potentially, the leverage to ensure that Daniel faced real consequences for his actions. Outside, Daniel Morrison sat in his car across the street from the Sullivan family home, watching the lights in the windows and planning his next move. He had no idea that inside, his wife and her father were systematically dismantling everything he had worked to build. The next morning brought a flurry of activity that felt both surreal and empowering to Rebecca. At 7 a.m. sharp, she was in Dr. Mitchell's office, submitting to photographs and examinations that documented the physical evidence of Daniel's assault. The bruising is consistent with an open-handed slap, Dr. Mitchell noted as he photographed her cheek from multiple angles. I can also see some finger marks on your upper arm that suggest he grabbed you at some point. Rebecca touched the tender spots she hadn't even noticed the day before. I don't remember him grabbing me. Trauma responses can affect memory, Dr. Mitchell explained. Your body remembers even when your mind doesn't. Dr. Amanda Foster, the maternal fetal medicine specialist, arrived to perform an ultrasound and stress assessment. Your blood pressure is elevated, which is concerning at 32 weeks. We need to monitor you closely for signs of preeclampsia or preterm labor. Will the baby be okay? Rebecca asked, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. Babies are remarkably resilient, Dr. Foster assured her, but maternal stress can have impacts. The important thing is that you're now in a safe environment with a strong support system. While Rebecca was at her medical appointments, Marcus Webb was at the police station, providing his security footage and incident report. The video was crystal clear, showing Daniel's unprovoked assault from multiple angles. Detective Sarah Williams, a veteran investigator who specialized in domestic violence cases, reviewed the footage with grim professional interest. This is one of the clearest cases of workplace assault I've ever seen, she told Marcus. 23 witnesses, multiple camera angles, and a victim who appears to be the defendant's pregnant wife. The district attorney is going to love this case. What happens next? Marcus asked. We'll issue a warrant for Daniel Morrison's arrest on charges of assault and battery. Given the public nature of the incident and the victim's pregnancy, the judge will likely set bail quite high. Back at Morrison Tech, the atmosphere was tense and uncomfortable. Jessica Clark had spent the morning fielding questions from employees who had witnessed the incident, while Thomas Brighton tried unsuccessfully to focus on damage control. We need to make a statement, Thomas insisted during an emergency meeting with the remaining senior staff. Investors are calling, employees are upset, and the press is starting to sniff around. What kind of statement? Asked Jennifer Walsh, the head of human resources. Our CEO just assaulted his pregnant wife in front of the entire company. There's no spinning that. Jessica looked up from her laptop where she had been documenting everything she remembered about Daniel's previous behavior toward Rebecca. I think the company needs to distance itself from Daniel immediately. This wasn't an isolated incident. He's been undermining Rebecca for months. What do you mean? Thomas asked. I mean, he regularly criticized her work in public, made comments about her pregnancy affecting her judgment, and excluded her from meetings where her input was crucial. I've been documenting instances for weeks because I was planning to talk to HR about creating a hostile work environment. Jennifer Walsh leaned forward. Why didn't you come to me sooner? Because Rebecca kept asking me not to. She said she could handle it, that making waves would hurt Daniel's reputation and the company's prospects. Thomas realized with growing horror that his business partner had been exhibiting a pattern of workplace abuse that the entire senior staff had witnessed. We need to call an emergency board meeting, If investors discover we knew about this behavior and did nothing, we could face serious liability issues. Meanwhile, Sarah Coleman was making progress on her investigation into Daniel's past. Her contact at the family court had provided some disturbing information about Daniel's first marriage. His ex-wife, Amanda Morrison, filed for divorce in 2018. Sarah reported to William during their morning check-in call. The records are sealed, but my source indicates there was a domestic violence component to the case. Can we contact the ex-wife directly? I'm working on that. Her attorney was Linda Peterson, who I know well. Linda's retired now, but she might be willing to share some general information about the case. Whatever it takes. Sarah, if Daniel has a pattern of abusing pregnant women, the judge needs to know about it. At the Sullivan house, Rebecca was reviewing her own documentation of Daniel's behavior. Patricia sat beside her on the couch, helping her organize incidents by date and severity. I can't believe I normalized so much of this, Rebecca said, looking at her notes. He criticized my appearance when I started showing, said pregnancy made me emotional and unreliable, excluded me from investor meetings I had helped arrange. Abuse escalates gradually, Patricia explained. It starts with small comments and builds until the victim accepts behavior that would have been unthinkable at the beginning of the relationship. Rebecca's laptop chimed with an email from Jessica containing statements from 5 female employees about Daniel's behavior. Each statement painted a picture of a man who would become increasingly hostile toward his wife as her pregnancy progressed. Listen to this, Rebecca said, reading from Jessica's report. Karen from accounting says Daniel made a comment at the Christmas party about how pregnancy was making me less sharp mentally. 3 people heard him say it. That's not just inappropriate, it's potential evidence of discrimination, Patricia noted. Dr. Mitchell called with Rebecca's test results. Everything looks good from a medical standpoint, but I want to see you again in 3 days. The stress markers in your blood work are elevated, which is understandable given the circumstances. Thank you for seeing me so quickly, Rebecca said. Your father and I have been friends for 20 years. I've watched you grow up. There's nothing I wouldn't do to help you through this. By noon, the evidence against Daniel was mounting rapidly. The police had issued an arrest warrant, the district attorney was preparing charges, and Sarah Coleman had gathered enough documentation to file for an emergency restraining order. William reviewed the growing file of evidence with satisfaction. We've built a solid foundation for both the criminal and civil cases. Now we need to focus on the corporate implications. His assistant buzzed in. Mr. Sullivan, Thomas Brighton from Morrison Tech is on line 1. He says it's urgent regarding the board meeting. William picked up the call. Thomas, I assume you're calling about yesterday's incident. William, I need you to know that the board is meeting this afternoon to discuss Daniel's status with the company. We had no idea about his previous behavior toward Rebecca. What's the board planning to do? We're voting on whether to suspend him pending the outcome of the criminal charges. I wanted to give you advance notice since Sullivan Capital Partners is our largest investor. William smiled grimly. I appreciate the call. Thomas, you might also want to discuss the financial irregularities Rebecca discovered in her quarterly review. I believe Daniel has been misrepresenting the company's true financial position to investors. The silence on the other end of the line told William everything he needed to know. We'll want to review those allegations carefully, Thomas said finally. I'm sure you will. I'll have Rebecca's documentation forwarded to the board before your meeting. As William hung up, he felt the pieces of his strategy falling into place. Daniel Morrison had made a catastrophic error in judgment, and now he would face the consequences on every front: criminal, civil, corporate, and personal. The war room was proving highly effective. Sarah Coleman arrived at the courthouse at 8 a.m. sharp, her arms full of legal documents and her expression set in determined lines. The emergency restraining order hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m., but she wanted time to review the evidence one final time. The documentation was overwhelming: security footage, witness statements, medical reports, and a growing file of incidents describing Daniel's pattern of controlling behavior. Most importantly, she had received a call from Linda Peterson the night before. Daniel Morrison's first wife did file domestic violence charges, Linda had confirmed. The case was settled out of court with a sealed agreement, but Amanda Morrison was 3 months pregnant when the most serious incident occurred. Now Sarah sat in the courthouse hallway, preparing to argue that Daniel Morrison posed a clear and present danger to his pregnant wife and unborn child. At 9:15, Judge Margaret Harrison called the case. Daniel Morrison sat at the defendant's table with his attorney, Richard Blackstone, a tall man in an expensive suit who specialized in defending high-profile clients. Your Honor, Sarah began, we are asking for an emergency restraining order based on clear evidence of domestic violence and a documented pattern of escalating abuse. She presented the security footage first. The courtroom fell silent as they watched Daniel strike his pregnant wife in front of 23 witnesses. Even Richard Blackstone shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The defendant's own company's security system captured this unprovoked assault, Sarah continued. Mrs. Morrison was simply doing her job, presenting quarterly marketing results, when her husband became enraged and physically attacked her. Judge Harrison studied the footage carefully. Mr. Blackstone, how does your client explain this behavior? Richard Blackstone stood slowly. Your Honor, my client deeply regrets this momentary lapse in judgment. Mr. Morrison has been under tremendous stress due to his company's upcoming initial public offering and increased pressure from investors. This was an isolated incident that does not reflect his true character. Isolated incident, Sarah interjected. Your Honor, may I present additional evidence? She introduced Jessica Clark's documentation of Daniel's workplace behavior, the medical reports showing multiple injuries, and testimony from Morrison Tech employees about the hostile work environment Daniel had created. Furthermore, Sarah continued, we have discovered that the defendant's previous marriage ended with domestic violence charges and a sealed settlement agreement. Mr. Morrison has a documented history of abusing pregnant women. Judge Harrison's expression hardened. Mr. Blackstone, were you aware of your client's previous domestic violence charges? Your Honor, those records are sealed and cannot be considered relevant to the current proceedings. The pattern of behavior is absolutely relevant, Judge Harrison replied sharply. The court grants the emergency restraining order. Mr. Morrison is prohibited from any contact with Rebecca Morrison, except through legal counsel. He is also prohibited from entering the family residence or approaching within 500 feet of Mrs. Morrison. Daniel's face went white as the judge continued. Furthermore, given the evidence of escalating behavior and the victim's advanced pregnancy, I am ordering immediate enforcement of this restraining order. Bailiff, please ensure Mr. Morrison understands the serious consequences of violating this order. Outside the courthouse, Sarah called William with the results. We got everything we asked for. The restraining order is in effect immediately, and the judge was clearly disturbed by the evidence of Daniel's previous behavior. Excellent work. What's our next step? I'm filing divorce papers this afternoon, along with a civil lawsuit for assault and battery. I'm also requesting emergency custody provisions that will prevent Daniel from having any unsupervised access to the baby when she's born. While Sarah was conquering the legal battlefield, William was implementing his corporate strategy. The Morrison Tech Board meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m., and he intended to be there in person. Sullivan Capital Partners owned 43% of Morrison Tech, making William the single largest investor. More importantly, the original funding agreements contained specific performance clauses tied to executive conduct and company reputation. Thomas Brighton met William in the conference room 30 minutes before the meeting was scheduled to begin. William, I want you to know that the entire board is horrified by what happened yesterday. We had no idea Daniel was capable of such behavior. I appreciate that, Thomas, but I'm more concerned about the company's future than its past. Daniel Morrison has become a liability that threatens every investor's interests. William spread Rebecca's financial documentation across the conference table. Beyond the domestic violence incident, it appears Daniel has been misrepresenting the company's financial position for months. Customer acquisition costs are up 37%, churn rates have doubled, and there are several questionable expenses that suggest possible financial impropriety. Thomas studied the numbers with growing alarm. These figures are completely different from what Daniel reported to the board last month. Because Daniel has been cooking the books, Rebecca discovered the discrepancies while preparing her quarterly presentation, which explains his extreme reaction when she suggested a strategy pivot. The other board members arrived gradually, their faces reflecting the gravity of the situation. Morrison Tech's 5-person board included Thomas Brighton, William Sullivan, venture capitalist Maria Rodriguez, tech industry veteran David Chen, and angel investor Patricia Kim. Before we address the domestic violence incident, William began once everyone was seated, I think the board needs to understand the full scope of Daniel Morrison's deception. He presented Rebecca's financial analysis systematically, showing how Daniel had manipulated data to hide the company's declining performance. The room grew increasingly tense as the implications became clear. If these numbers are accurate, said Maria Rodriguez, Daniel has been committing fraud against his own investors. The numbers are accurate, William confirmed. Rebecca prepared this analysis using raw data from the company's financial systems. Daniel knew she was about to expose his deception, which explains why he reacted so violently. David Chen spoke up. This puts the upcoming IPO in serious jeopardy. If the SEC discovers we've been providing inaccurate financial information, we could face criminal charges. Which is why, William continued, I believe the board has no choice but to remove Daniel Morrison as CEO immediately. Thomas Brighton looked around the table. I hate to say this, but William is right. Between the domestic violence incident and the financial improprieties, Daniel has become an unacceptable risk to the company. The vote was unanimous. Daniel Morrison was terminated as CEO of Morrison Tech, effective immediately. Thomas Brighton was named interim CEO, and the board authorized a complete financial audit to determine the full extent of Daniel's deception. What about the IPO? Asked Patricia Kim. We'll need to postpone it until we can provide accurate financial statements to the SEC, William replied. It's better to delay than to face fraud charges later. As the board meeting concluded, William felt a grim satisfaction. Daniel Morrison had lost his wife, his home, and now his company in the span of 24 hours. But the campaign was far from over. Rebecca was safe for now, but William knew that men like Daniel didn't accept defeat gracefully. The real battle was just beginning. At 2:30 in the morning, the security system at the Sullivan family home erupted in a cacophony of alarms. William bolted upright in bed, immediately reaching for his phone to check the security cameras. Patricia grabbed her robe and rushed to Rebecca's room. What's happening? Rebecca asked, sitting up in bed, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. Someone's at the front door, Patricia said, helping her daughter into a robe. Stay here while I check with your father. On the security monitors, Daniel Morrison was clearly visible in the porch light, pounding frantically on the front door. His hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, and his face showed the strain of a man who had lost everything in a single day. I know you're in there, Daniel shouted, his voice carrying clearly through the intercom system. Rebecca, you can't hide behind your daddy forever. William activated the two-way communication system from his bedroom. Daniel, you need to leave immediately. You're violating a court order. I don't care about your money or your lawyers, Daniel screamed back. She's my wife, that's my baby, she's carrying. Rebecca appeared at her parents' bedroom door, trembling despite her mother's protective arm around her shoulders. On the monitors, Daniel looked increasingly unhinged, alternating between pounding on the door and pacing back and forth on the porch. Should we call the police? Patricia asked. Already done, William replied, showing his phone. I called them the moment the alarms went off. They should be here within 5 minutes. Daniel's voice echoed through the intercom again. Rebecca, I know you can hear me. We can work this out. Think about our baby. Think about our future. He's lost his mind, Rebecca whispered, sinking into a chair. This is exactly what I was afraid would happen. He's desperate, William observed, watching Daniel's erratic behavior on the monitors. The board meeting today made it clear that he's lost everything. Desperate men do dangerous things. The sound of police sirens approached rapidly, and Daniel's demeanor changed instantly. Instead of fleeing, he positioned himself directly in front of the door and began shouting even louder. This is harassment. I have a right to see my wife. 2 police cars pulled into the driveway, their blue and red lights painting the front yard in alternating colors. 4 officers approached the porch with their hands on their weapons. Sir, step away from the door, the lead officer commanded. You're in violation of a restraining order. This is my wife's family home, Daniel protested, but he raised his hands and stepped back. Sir, you're under arrest for violation of a restraining order and contempt of court. As the officers handcuffed Daniel, he continued shouting toward the house. Rebecca, this isn't over. You can't destroy our marriage because of one mistake. Rebecca watched from her parents' bedroom window as the police car pulled away, Daniel's face visible through the rear window. Even in custody, his expression remained defiant rather than remorseful. That was terrifying, she admitted, sinking back into the chair. But also useful, William noted grimly. Sarah Coleman will be very interested in this latest development. It demonstrates a clear pattern of escalating behavior and complete disregard for legal authority. By morning, news of Daniel's arrest was spreading rapidly through the business community. Thomas Brighton fielded calls from concerned investors, while Jessica Clark managed increasingly curious inquiries from Morrison Tech employees. How did he even know where to find her? Jessica asked during her phone call with Rebecca. My parents' address isn't exactly a secret, Rebecca replied. Daniel's been to family dinners there dozens of times. The restraining order should have been enough to keep him away. Should have been. But Daniel's always believed rules don't apply to him. That's part of what made him successful in business. But it also made him dangerous as a husband. Sarah Coleman arrived at the Sullivan house by 9 a.m., armed with copies of the police report and ready to use Daniel's violation to strengthen their legal position. This changes everything, she announced, spreading documents across the kitchen table. Violating a restraining order within 24 hours of it being issued shows complete disrespect for legal authority. The judge will not be pleased. What does this mean for the divorce proceedings? Rebecca asked. It means we can accelerate the timeline and request additional protections. I'm also going to use this incident to strengthen our civil lawsuit. Daniel's behavior is becoming increasingly erratic and dangerous. Dr. Foster arrived for Rebecca's scheduled checkup, bringing a portable ultrasound machine to the house. Given the stress of last night's incident, I want to monitor the baby closely. The ultrasound showed a healthy baby girl, active and growing normally despite the trauma her mother had endured. Everything looks good, Dr. Foster reported. But your blood pressure is still elevated. We need to keep you in a calm, supportive environment. That's the plan, Patricia assured her. Meanwhile, at Morrison Tech, the consequences of Daniel's actions were rippling through every aspect of the business. The financial audit William had requested was revealing the true extent of Daniel's deception. He's been hiding over $2 million in losses, the auditor reported to Thomas Brighton. Customer acquisition costs have been misreported, churn rates understated, and several large expenses categorized incorrectly to make the company appear more profitable than it actually is. How long has this been going on? At least 6 months, possibly longer. The manipulation became more aggressive in the past quarter, which coincides with the timeline for the planned IPO. Thomas realized that Daniel hadn't just been hiding poor performance. He had been actively defrauding investors in preparation for taking the company public. We need to notify the SEC immediately. If they discover this during their IPO review, the entire management team could face criminal charges. The revelation meant that Morrison Tech would need to restate its financial reports for the entire year, effectively killing any chance of an IPO in the near future. The company's valuation would plummet, and several employees would likely lose their jobs. Daniel didn't just destroy his marriage, Thomas told his assistant. He destroyed his company, too. At the jail, Daniel was being processed for his second arrest in as many days. His expensive attorney, Richard Blackstone, arrived to handle the arraignment, but his usual confidence was noticeably absent. Daniel, you need to understand the gravity of your situation, Richard said during their brief consultation. Violating a restraining order while facing domestic violence charges shows a complete disregard for the legal system. The judge is going to set a very high bail, if she grants bail at all. I just wanted to talk to my wife, Daniel protested. This whole thing has been blown completely out of proportion. You struck your pregnant wife in front of 23 witnesses, then violated a court order within 24 hours. There's no spinning that as a misunderstanding. The arraignment hearing was scheduled for later that afternoon, but Richard Blackstone was already preparing for the worst. His client had transformed from a successful tech CEO into an unstable domestic abuser in the span of 48 hours, and the evidence against him was overwhelming. Back at the Sullivan house, Rebecca was beginning to feel something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Daniel's arrest had demonstrated that the legal system could protect her, and her father's corporate maneuvering had shown that actions had consequences even for powerful men. I'm starting to believe we can actually win this, she told her mother. We're not just going to win, Patricia replied firmly. We're going to make sure Daniel Morrison never has the opportunity to hurt you or anyone else again. Saturn. The violation had been a turning point, but Rebecca sensed that Daniel's desperation would only make him more dangerous as his world continued to collapse around him. While Rebecca recovered in the hospital under observation for stress-induced contractions, William Sullivan was orchestrating the systematic destruction of Daniel Morrison's professional life with the precision of a master chess player who could see 20 moves ahead. The private room overlooked the city skyline, and Rebecca watched the morning traffic below while Dr. Foster monitored her blood pressure and the baby's heart rate. The contractions had stopped, but the stress markers in her blood work remained elevated. "The baby is fine," Dr. Foster assured her. "But I want to keep you here for 24 hours just to be safe. Stress can trigger preterm labor, and we're still 6 weeks from your due date." Patricia Sullivan sat in the bedside chair, reading pregnancy magazines and trying to project calm while her husband waged corporate warfare from his downtown office. "How are you feeling about everything?" Patricia asked during a quiet moment. "Relieved, mostly," Rebecca admitted. "For the first time in months, I feel like I can breathe. Like I'm not walking on eggshells, waiting for Daniel to explode about something." "You've been living in survival mode for so long, it's going to take time to readjust to feeling safe." Meanwhile, across town at Sullivan Capital Partners, William was making the phone calls that would end Daniel Morrison's career. 30 years in venture capital had given him relationships with every major investor in the city, and he was calling in decades of accumulated favors. "Robert, it's William Sullivan. I need to discuss the Morrison Tech situation with you." Robert Chen, managing partner at Pinnacle Ventures, had invested $2 million in Morrison Tech's Series B round. "William, I've been hearing disturbing rumors about Daniel Morrison. Is it true that he assaulted Rebecca?" "It's not a rumor. It happened in front of 23 witnesses, and we have security footage. But that's not the only problem. Our forensic audit has revealed that Daniel has been systematically misrepresenting the company's financial position to investors." "How bad is it? $2 million in hidden losses, falsified customer acquisition data, and questionable expenses that appear to be personal rather than business-related. He's been preparing to take your money and everyone else's public based on fraudulent information." The silence on the other end of the line was telling. "William, what do you need from me? I need you to join me in demanding Daniel's immediate removal from all company operations. As long as he remains involved with Morrison Tech, every investor faces potential liability for securities fraud. You have my support. What about the other investors? I'm calling everyone this morning. By the end of the day, Daniel Morrison will be persona non grata in the tech investment community." William's next call was to Maria Rodriguez at Tech Forward Capital, who had led Morrison Tech's Series A round. "Maria, I assume you've heard about the domestic violence incident. It's all anyone is talking about. A CEO striking his pregnant wife at a board meeting. It's a public relations nightmare. It gets worse. The financial audit reveals that Daniel has been defrauding investors for months. I'm recommending that all major investors support his immediate termination and consider legal action to recover their investments." "My God, William, how did we miss this?" "Because Daniel is a skilled manipulator who showed different faces to different people. But his mask has finally slipped, and now we can see who he really is." By noon, William had spoken with representatives from every major investor in Morrison Tech. The consensus was unanimous. Daniel Morrison was finished in the tech industry. The board meeting that afternoon was a formality, with William controlling 43% of the company and the other investors representing another 35%. Daniel's removal was guaranteed. Thomas Brighton called the meeting to order in the Morrison Tech conference room where, just 3 days earlier, Daniel had struck his pregnant wife. The irony was not lost on anyone present. "Given recent events," Thomas began, "the board needs to address the question of Daniel Morrison's continued involvement with the company." William presented the forensic audit results methodically, showing how Daniel had manipulated financial data to hide the company's declining performance. The numbers were devastating. Customer acquisition costs had tripled. Monthly recurring revenue was declining, and the company was burning through cash at an unsustainable rate. Furthermore, William continued, the domestic violence incident has created significant liability issues for the company. We've already received calls from 3 major clients expressing concerns about Morrison Tech's leadership. David Chen, the board's technology advisor, spoke up. If we don't act decisively, we risk losing our entire customer base. No one wants to do business with a company whose CEO beats his pregnant wife. The vote was swift and unanimous. Daniel Morrison was terminated as CEO, stripped of his board position, and required to surrender all company property immediately. His stock options were revoked, and he was prohibited from representing himself as affiliated with Morrison Tech in any capacity. "What about the IPO?" asked Patricia Kim. "Dead in the water," William replied bluntly. "The SEC requires 3 years of audited financial statements for a public offering. With Daniel's fraud, we'll need to restate our numbers for the entire period, which eliminates any possibility of going public in the near future." Thomas Brighton was named permanent CEO, with a mandate to rebuild the company's reputation and financial stability. "Our first priority is damage control. We need to communicate with employees, customers, and remaining investors about our commitment to ethical leadership." As the board meeting concluded, William felt a grim satisfaction. Daniel Morrison had built Morrison Tech from a startup idea into a company valued at $50 million. In less than 72 hours, that value had evaporated, along with Daniel's reputation, career prospects, and financial security. But William wasn't finished. He had one more surprise for his daughter's abuser. That evening, Sarah Coleman arrived at the hospital with news that made Rebecca smile for the first time in days. "I've been in contact with Amanda Peterson, Daniel's ex-wife. She's agreed to testify about her experiences during their marriage." "What did she tell you?" Rebecca asked. "Very similar pattern to what you experienced. Emotional abuse, financial control, isolation from family and friends. The difference is that Daniel's violence escalated more quickly with Amanda because she challenged him more directly." "How so?" "Amanda was a successful attorney when they married. Daniel systematically undermined her career, criticized her appearance, and eventually became physically abusive when she threatened to leave. The final incident occurred when she was 3 months pregnant." Rebecca felt a chill. "What happened?" "Daniel pushed her down a flight of stairs. She lost the baby and nearly died from internal bleeding. That's when she finally pressed charges. And he got away with it. He settled out of court for $2 million and agreed to sealed records. Amanda used the money to relocate to another state and rebuild her life, but she's been following his career and wasn't surprised to hear about what happened to you." Patricia Sullivan gripped her daughter's hand. "Thank God you got away from him before he could hurt you more seriously." "Amanda wants to help ensure that Daniel faces real consequences this time," Sarah continued. "Her testimony will establish a clear pattern of domestic violence against pregnant women, which will be crucial for both the criminal case and custody proceedings." That night, as Rebecca drifted off to sleep in her hospital bed, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope for the future. Daniel's world was collapsing around him, but hers was just beginning to rebuild. The baby kicked gently against her ribs, as if agreeing that they were finally safe. The civil trial began on a crisp Monday morning in October, with Rebecca 8.5 months pregnant and determined to see justice served. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters who had caught wind of the high-profile case involving a prominent tech CEO and venture capitalist family. Sarah Coleman had spent weeks preparing for this moment, and her confidence showed as she arranged her files at the plaintiff's table. Across the aisle, Richard Blackstone looked considerably less optimistic than he had at the beginning of his representation of Daniel Morrison. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Margaret Harrison," the bailiff announced. Judge Harrison, a veteran of domestic violence cases, surveyed the packed courtroom with a stern expression. "This is a civil trial for assault and battery, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I will tolerate no disruptions or theatrical behavior from either side." Sarah Coleman stood to deliver her opening statement, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about a man who believed his wealth and position gave him the right to abuse his pregnant wife. You will see clear, undeniable evidence that Daniel Morrison systematically controlled, manipulated, and ultimately physically assaulted Rebecca Morrison in front of 23 witnesses." She gestured toward Rebecca, who sat with quiet dignity despite her advanced pregnancy. Mrs. Morrison was doing her job, presenting quarterly marketing results to her company, when her husband became enraged and struck her across the face. But this assault was not an isolated incident. It was the culmination of months of escalating abuse. Daniel Morrison sat at the defendant's table, his once confident demeanor replaced by the hollow look of a man who had lost everything. His expensive suit couldn't hide the stress that had aged him years in a matter of weeks. Richard Blackstone's opening statement was a study in damage control. "Ladies and gentlemen, my client does not deny that he struck his wife. It was wrong, and he deeply regrets it. But this was not the calculated assault that opposing counsel would have you believe. Mr. Morrison was under tremendous stress from running a company, facing an IPO, and dealing with pressure from investors." Several jury members shifted uncomfortably as Blackstone continued. "Mr. Morrison's pregnant wife was challenging his business decisions in front of investors and employees, undermining his authority at a critical time for the company. When she persisted, despite his attempts to redirect the conversation, he reacted poorly. It was a momentary lapse in judgment, not a pattern of domestic violence." Sarah Coleman's first witness was Marcus Webb, the security chief whose footage had captured the assault. Marcus's military bearing and professional demeanor made him an ideal witness as he described the events of that day. "Mrs. Morrison was presenting her quarterly report when Mr. Morrison interrupted her," Marcus testified. "His tone was aggressive and demeaning. When she continued with her presentation, he became increasingly agitated." "What happened next?" Sarah asked. "Mr. Morrison made a comment about pregnancy brain affecting her judgment." Mrs. Morrison responded professionally, citing specific data to support her recommendations. "That's when Mr. Morrison stood up and struck her across the face." "How would you describe the force of the blow?" "Significant." The sound echoed through the conference room, and Mrs. Morrison stumbled backward. There was no question it was intentional and forceful. "What was Mr. Morrison's demeanor after the assault?" "He showed no remorse. When I told him to step away from his wife, he said, 'She's my wife. This is my company. You all work for me.' He seemed to believe he had the right to strike her." Richard Blackstone's cross-examination attempted to suggest that Marcus had misinterpreted the situation, but the security footage spoke for itself. Sarah's next witness was Dr. Robert Mitchell, who had examined Rebecca the morning after the assault. "The bruising was consistent with an open-handed slap delivered with significant force," Dr. Mitchell testified. "I also documented finger marks on Mrs. Morrison's upper arm, suggesting she had been grabbed or restrained at some point." "Were there any concerns about the impact on Mrs. Morrison's pregnancy?" "Absolutely. Domestic violence during pregnancy significantly increases the risk of complications, including preterm labor, low birth weight, and maternal depression. The stress hormones released during trauma can directly affect fetal development." Jessica Clark's testimony provided crucial context about Daniel's behavior leading up to the assault. "Over the past 6 months, Daniel became increasingly critical of Rebecca's work," Jessica explained. "He would interrupt her presentations, dismiss her ideas in front of clients, and make comments about her pregnancy affecting her judgment." "Can you give the jury specific examples?" "At the June investor meeting, Daniel told potential funders that Rebecca's maternal instincts were making her too conservative in her marketing approach. At the July board meeting, he suggested that her pregnancy hormones were making her emotional and unreliable." "How did Mrs. Morrison respond to these comments?" "She remained professional, but I could see it was taking a toll on her. She started second-guessing herself, asking me to review presentations multiple times before meetings." The prosecution's most powerful witness was Amanda Peterson, Daniel's ex-wife, who had flown in from California to testify about her own experiences. Amanda was a composed woman in her early 40s, now a successful attorney with a thriving practice. Her testimony was devastating in its calm recitation of familiar patterns. "Daniel's abuse always escalated during times of stress," Amanda explained. "He would become controlling about money, critical of my appearance, and increasingly jealous of my career success." "Did he ever become physical with you?" "Multiple times. It started with grabbing my arm during arguments, then escalated to pushing and slapping. The final incident occurred when I was 3 months pregnant." "Can you describe what happened?" Amanda's voice remained steady despite the emotional nature of her testimony. I had decided to leave Daniel and told him I was filing for divorce. He became enraged and pushed me down a flight of stairs. I lost the baby and spent 3 days in the hospital. Did you press charges? I tried to, but Daniel's family had connections in the district attorney's office. They convinced me to accept a financial settlement in exchange for sealed records and my agreement not to pursue criminal charges. Richard Blackstone's cross-examination of Amanda was brief and respectful, clearly recognizing that attacking a woman who had lost a baby due to domestic violence would backfire spectacularly with the jury. Rebecca's own testimony was the emotional centerpiece of the trial. 8.5 months pregnant, she spoke with quiet strength about years of escalating abuse. I thought love meant making excuses for someone's worst behavior, she told the jury. Daniel convinced me that his criticism was meant to help me improve, that his control was protection, that his jealousy was proof of how much he cared. When did you realize this wasn't normal? When he hit me in front of everyone we worked with. I saw the shock and horror on their faces, and I realized that I had been normalizing behavior that everyone else recognized as abuse. What impact has this experience had on your life? I lost my marriage, my home, and my sense of safety. I'm about to become a single mother because the man I trusted to protect me became the person I needed protection from. Richard Blackstone's cross-examination attempted to paint Rebecca as vindictive and manipulative, suggesting that she was using the domestic violence incident to gain advantage in divorce proceedings. Mrs. Morrison, isn't it true that you discovered your husband's financial irregularities weeks before the alleged assault? I discovered discrepancies in our quarterly numbers while preparing my presentation. I was planning to recommend strategy changes based on the data. And isn't it true that you could have presented this information privately to your husband instead of embarrassing him in front of investors? Sarah Coleman objected before Rebecca could answer. Your Honor, this line of questioning suggests that the victim is somehow responsible for her own assault. Sustained, Judge Harrison ruled sharply. Mr. Blackstone, the circumstances of a business presentation do not justify physical violence. Move on. William Sullivan's testimony provided the business context that helped the jury understand the broader implications of Daniel's behavior. Daniel Morrison defrauded investors, abused his pregnant wife, and violated multiple court orders. William testified, "This is not the behavior of someone under temporary stress. This is the behavior of someone who believes he is above the law." How has this incident affected Morrison Tech? The company has lost 60% of its value. The IPO has been canceled indefinitely, and several major clients have terminated their contracts. Daniel's actions didn't just destroy his marriage, they destroyed his company and the livelihoods of dozens of employees. The prosecution rested after 3 days of testimony, having built an overwhelming case that Daniel Morrison was a serial abuser who had escalated to violence when his pregnant wife challenged his authority. Richard Blackstone's defense was brief and largely ineffective. Character witnesses testified about Daniel's business acumen and charitable contributions, but their testimony rang hollow in the face of security footage showing him striking his pregnant wife. Daniel himself chose not to testify, a decision that likely saved him from perjury charges but left his abuse unexplained and undefended. In her closing argument, Sarah Coleman reminded the jury of their responsibility to send a message about domestic violence. Daniel Morrison believed that his wealth and position put him above the law. He believed that his pregnant wife was his property to control and abuse. Your verdict will determine whether we as a society accept this behavior or reject it completely. Richard Blackstone's closing argument focused on mitigation, asking the jury to consider Daniel's stress levels and lack of prior criminal history. But the argument felt desperate and unconvincing. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with their verdict, guilty on all counts, with damages awarded of $1.2 million for assault, emotional distress, and future therapy costs. As the verdict was read, Daniel Morrison's face crumbled as he realized the full extent of his losses. In less than 2 months, he had lost his wife, his company, his reputation, and now his financial security. Rebecca felt her baby kick as if celebrating the victory. For the first time in months, justice felt possible. The jury foreman stood to deliver the verdict, his voice steady and clear in the hushed courtroom. In the matter of Morrison versus Morrison, we find for the plaintiff on all counts. Rebecca felt her mother's hand squeeze hers as the foreman continued reading the damages awarded $1.2 million for assault and battery, emotional distress, and future therapy costs. The amount was significant enough to ensure Rebecca's financial independence while raising her daughter. Daniel Morrison's face went ashen as he realized the full scope of his financial ruin. Between the civil judgment, legal fees, and the loss of his company, his net worth had evaporated in a matter of weeks. Furthermore, Judge Harrison announced, given the defendant's pattern of domestic violence and violation of court orders, I am imposing additional restrictions. Mr. Morrison is prohibited from any contact with the plaintiff or her family, and any future custody arrangements must include supervised visitation only. Outside the courthouse, Rebecca stood with her legal team as reporters shouted questions. Sarah Coleman stepped forward to make a brief statement. Today's verdict sends a clear message that domestic violence will not be tolerated, regardless of the perpetrator's wealth or social position. Mrs. Morrison is grateful for the justice served and looks forward to rebuilding her life. Rebecca declined to make a personal statement, but her quiet dignity spoke volumes as she walked to her father's car, supported by her mother and flanked by security. The criminal trial followed 2 weeks later, resulting in a 6-month jail sentence for Daniel and mandatory anger management counseling. The relatively light sentence reflected the first-time nature of the charges, but it established a criminal record that would follow Daniel for the rest of his life. At Morrison Tech, Thomas Brighton was working to rebuild the company's reputation and financial stability. The board had voted to implement comprehensive anti-harassment policies, mandatory sensitivity training, and an anonymous reporting system for workplace misconduct. We're trying to turn this tragedy into an opportunity to create a better workplace culture, Thomas explained to the remaining employees during an all-hands meeting. What happened in this conference room should never happen anywhere, and we're committed to ensuring it doesn't happen again. The company survived, though in diminished form. Several major clients returned after seeing the changes in leadership and culture, but the IPO was postponed indefinitely. Many employees found new jobs, but those who stayed were committed to rebuilding Morrison Tech's reputation. Jessica Clark was promoted to Chief Marketing Officer, taking over many of Rebecca's former responsibilities. I think about Rebecca every day, she told her new team. She showed incredible strength and professionalism even while being systematically undermined. That's the standard we're going to strive for. Rebecca, meanwhile, was preparing for single motherhood with the support of her family and a growing network of friends. She enrolled in childbirth classes with Patricia as her partner, learning breathing techniques and pain management strategies. I never imagined I'd be doing this without a husband, Rebecca admitted during one of their classes. You're not doing it without support, Patricia reminded her. You have me, your father, Jessica, and a whole community of people who love you. Dr. Foster monitored Rebecca's pregnancy closely, especially as her due date approached. The stress of the trials had initially caused some concerns, but Rebecca's blood pressure had stabilized once she was in a safe environment. The baby is measuring perfectly, Dr. Foster reported during a routine appointment. She's going to be a healthy little girl. She's been active lately, Rebecca said, rubbing her belly. I think she's excited to meet everyone. Babies can sense their mother's emotional state. Now that you're feeling safer and more settled, she's probably more active and alert. Rebecca had decided to keep the Sullivan name professionally, distancing herself from the Morrison scandal. Job offers poured in from companies impressed by her grace under pressure and her marketing expertise. TechFlow, Morrison Tech's biggest competitor, offered her a senior vice president position with a substantial salary and comprehensive benefits. The irony wasn't lost on Rebecca that Daniel's behavior had actually enhanced her career prospects. They specifically mentioned your professionalism during the trials, the recruiter explained. You maintained your dignity and focus despite extraordinary circumstances. That's exactly the kind of leadership they want. Rebecca accepted the position, scheduled to start 3 months after the baby was born. The company offered flexible scheduling, on-site childcare, and a supportive work environment that prioritized employee well-being. William Sullivan had channeled his anger and energy into creating something positive from the tragedy. He established the Sullivan Foundation for Domestic Violence Prevention, focusing specifically on workplace harassment and abuse. Too many women face what Rebecca endured, he explained to the foundation's board of directors. They need legal resources, financial support, and advocacy to escape abusive situations. The foundation's first initiative provided emergency legal representation for domestic violence victims, particularly those whose abusers held positions of power or authority. Sarah Coleman agreed to serve as the foundation's chief legal advisor, dedicating a portion of her practice to pro bono domestic violence cases. Rebecca's case was unusual because she had resources and family support, Sarah explained to the foundation staff. Most women facing domestic violence don't have access to high-powered attorneys or wealthy fathers. We need to level the playing field. The foundation also partnered with business schools and professional organizations to develop training programs about recognizing and preventing workplace harassment. Rebecca agreed to share her story at these seminars, helping other women identify warning signs of abusive behavior. I want women to understand that abuse doesn't always start with physical violence, Rebecca told one audience. It often begins with subtle forms of control and criticism that gradually escalate. If I can help even one woman recognize these patterns early, then something positive will have come from my experience. As Rebecca's due date approached, she found herself feeling genuinely optimistic about the future for the first time in months. Her parents had converted the guest room into a beautiful nursery, complete with a rocking chair by the window where Rebecca could nurse the baby while looking out at the garden. I think I'm ready, she told her mother as they folded tiny clothes and organized baby supplies. You've been ready for months, Patricia replied. You just needed to believe in yourself again. I keep thinking about what I would tell her if she ever found herself in a situation like mine. What would you tell her? That she deserves to be treated with respect and kindness, that love should never involve fear or control, and that she should never be afraid to ask for help when she needs it. The baby seemed to respond to her mother's voice, kicking gently against Rebecca's ribs as if in agreement. On a quiet Sunday evening, 3 days before her due date, Rebecca felt the first contraction while reading in her childhood bedroom. She called to her mother, who immediately sprang into action with the efficiency of someone who had been preparing for this moment for weeks. Is it time? Patricia asked, timing the contractions with a stopwatch. I think so, Rebecca said, breathing through another wave of pain. It's really happening. As they drove to the hospital, Rebecca felt a deep sense of gratitude for the support system that surrounded her. She was about to become a single mother, but she wasn't facing motherhood alone. The future stretched ahead of her, full of possibility and hope. At 3:17 in the morning on November 15th, Grace Patricia Sullivan entered the world with a strong cry that echoed through the delivery room. Rebecca held her daughter for the first time, tears streaming down her face as she marveled at the tiny perfect features and dark hair that reminded her of her own baby pictures. She's beautiful, Patricia whispered, leaning over to stroke her granddaughter's cheek. Look at those eyes. Grace's eyes were wide and alert, seeming to take in her surroundings with an unusual intensity for a newborn. Dr. Foster completed her examination with a satisfied smile. 8 pounds, 2 ounces, and perfectly healthy, she announced. Apgar scores are excellent. This little girl is ready to take on the world. William Sullivan arrived at the hospital within the hour, his usual composed demeanor cracking as he held his granddaughter for the first time. She's perfect, sweetheart. Absolutely perfect. Jessica Clark brought flowers and a teddy bear, crying happy tears as she met her best friend's daughter. She has your determination already, Jessica observed as Grace gripped her finger with surprising strength. I hope she gets my stubborn streak too, Rebecca laughed. She's going to need it. The news of Grace's birth spread quickly through their circle of friends and family. Even Thomas Brighton sent flowers with a note. Congratulations on your beautiful daughter. Morrison Tech wishes you both every happiness. Daniel Morrison was notably absent, serving his jail sentence and prohibited from any contact with Rebecca or the baby. Sarah Coleman had ensured that his parental rights were severely limited, requiring supervised visitation only after he completed anger management counseling and psychological evaluation. Has he made any attempts to contact you? Sarah asked during a visit to the hospital. His attorney sent a letter requesting visitation rights, Rebecca replied. But I'm not ready for that conversation yet. Maybe someday, when Grace is older and can understand the situation, but not now. That's completely within your rights. The court order protects both of you from any unwanted contact. Rebecca's recovery progressed smoothly, and she was able to go home after 2 days. The nursery at her parents' house felt warm and welcoming, filled with natural light and decorated in soft pastels. Grace settled into a routine quickly, sleeping well and nursing easily. She's such a good baby, Patricia marveled during one of their middle-of-the-night feeding sessions. She hardly fusses at all. I think she knows she's safe and loved, Rebecca said, watching her daughter's tiny hand curl around her finger. She doesn't have to worry about angry voices or tension in the house. The first few weeks of motherhood were both exhausting and exhilarating. Rebecca discovered reserves of love she hadn't known existed, along with a fierce protectiveness that made her understand why her father had fought so hard to defend her. I would do anything to protect her, she told William during one of their evening walks around the neighborhood, Grace sleeping peacefully in her stroller. That's exactly how I felt the moment you were born, William replied, and how I still feel 30 years later. Morrison Tech continued its slow recovery under Thomas Brighton's leadership. The company had implemented sweeping changes in corporate culture, including mandatory training on workplace harassment, anonymous reporting systems, and zero-tolerance policies for abusive behavior. We're trying to create the kind of workplace where someone like Rebecca would feel supported and valued. Thomas explained to a business reporter, "What happened here should never happen anywhere." The company's financial situation had stabilized, though the lost IPO opportunity had cost everyone involved millions in potential returns. Several key employees had left for other opportunities, but those who remained were committed to rebuilding the company's reputation. Jessica Clark thrived in her new role as Chief Marketing Officer, implementing many of the strategies Rebecca had proposed in her final presentation. Customer acquisition costs dropped by 25% in the first quarter under Jessica's leadership, and employee satisfaction surveys showed significant improvement. Rebecca's ideas were brilliant, Jessica told the board during her first quarterly review. Daniel's ego prevented him from seeing that his wife was trying to save the company. The Sullivan Foundation for Domestic Violence Prevention grew rapidly, attracting support from other tech leaders who had been horrified by the Morrison Tech incident. The foundation's legal aid program had already helped dozens of women escape abusive relationships, providing both financial resources and expert legal representation. Rebecca began speaking at the foundation's educational events when Grace was 6 weeks old, sharing her story with business leaders and women's groups. Her presentations were powerful and moving, focusing on the subtle signs of workplace harassment and the importance of supporting colleagues who might be experiencing abuse. Domestic violence doesn't always look like what you see in movies, she told one audience. Sometimes it looks like a successful executive systematically undermining his wife's confidence in professional settings. Sometimes it looks like criticism disguised as concern or control disguised as protection. The audiences responded with standing ovations and, more importantly, with increased awareness and commitment to preventing workplace harassment. Several companies contacted the foundation to request training programs after hearing Rebecca's presentation. Sarah Coleman had found her true calling in domestic violence law, dedicating half her practice to pro bono cases through the foundation. Rebecca's case showed me how much impact we can have when we give women the resources to fight back, she explained to a law school class. When Grace was 3 months old, Rebecca started her new position at TechFlow as Senior Vice President of Marketing. The company had waited patiently for her to recover from childbirth and adjust to motherhood, demonstrating the kind of family-friendly policies that were becoming more common in progressive tech companies. We believe that supporting working mothers makes us a stronger company, her new CEO explained on her first day. Your experience and insights are exactly what we need to grow our market share while maintaining our values. The on-site childcare facility was state-of-the-art, with caring staff and a philosophy that recognized the importance of work-life balance. Rebecca could visit Grace during lunch breaks and nurse her in a comfortable private room designed specifically for working mothers. This is what supportive leadership looks like, Rebecca told Jessica during one of their weekly coffee meetings. It's such a contrast to what I experienced at Morrison Tech. You deserve to work in an environment that values you, Jessica replied, and Grace deserves to see her mother being treated with respect and dignity. Rebecca's first major project at TechFlow was developing a marketing strategy for their new software platform aimed at small businesses. She threw herself into the work with renewed energy, drawing on her years of experience while incorporating fresh perspectives gained through her recent struggles. The campaign she developed emphasized empowerment, security, and growth themes that resonated deeply with her target audience of entrepreneurs and small business owners. The tagline she created, "Building Your Future with Confidence," reflected her own journey from victim to survivor to leader. This campaign is personal for you, observed Mark Stevens, TechFlow's CEO, during her presentation to the executive team. The best marketing always comes from authentic experience, Rebecca replied. I understand what it feels like to have your confidence undermined and then to rebuild it stronger than before. That's exactly what our software helps small businesses do. The campaign was hugely successful, generating a 40% increase in new customer signups within the first quarter. Industry publications praised its emotional authenticity and clear messaging, establishing Rebecca as a rising star in the marketing field. Daniel Morrison's release from jail after serving 4 months of his 6-month sentence was barely noticed in the business community. He had become a cautionary tale, a reminder of how quickly success could turn to ruin when personal behavior crossed legal and ethical boundaries. His attempts to rebuild his career were largely unsuccessful. The tech industry had a long memory for scandals, and his domestic violence conviction made him unemployable at any reputable company. He eventually took a consulting position with a small firm that specialized in crisis management, work that paid a fraction of his former CEO's salary. He keeps sending letters requesting visitation with Grace, Sarah Coleman informed Rebecca during one of their regular check-ins. His attorney claims he's completed anger management counseling and wants to establish a relationship with his daughter. What do you recommend? Rebecca asked. Legally, he has some parental rights, but they're severely limited given his criminal record. Any visitation would need to be supervised, probably in a family court setting. The decision is entirely yours. Rebecca looked at Grace, now 6 months old and sitting up on her own, babbling happily as she played with colorful blocks. The idea of exposing her innocent daughter to Daniel's toxicity felt overwhelming. Not yet, she decided. Maybe when she's older and can understand the situation better. For now, I want to focus on building a life filled with positive influences and healthy relationships. That's completely reasonable. We can revisit the question in a few years if you feel differently. As Grace's first birthday approached, Rebecca reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. 12 months earlier, she had been trapped in an abusive marriage, walking on eggshells around a man who claimed to love her while systematically destroying her confidence. Now she was a successful executive at a company that valued her contributions, a single mother raising a happy and healthy daughter, and an advocate for other women facing similar struggles. The transformation felt miraculous, but she knew it had been built on hard work, courage, and the support of people who truly cared about her well-being. The Sullivan Foundation hosted its first annual fundraising gala when Grace was 11 months old. Rebecca served as the keynote speaker, addressing an audience of business leaders, philanthropists, and domestic violence advocates. 18 months ago, I was presenting quarterly marketing results when my husband struck me in front of our entire company, she began, her voice strong and clear. Today, I'm standing here as a survivor, a mother, and an advocate for change. She spoke about the importance of recognizing workplace harassment, supporting colleagues who might be experiencing abuse, and creating corporate cultures that prioritize respect and dignity for all employees. Abuse thrives in silence, she told the audience. But when we speak up and support each other, justice becomes possible. When we refuse to tolerate controlling behavior in our workplaces and communities, we create spaces where everyone can thrive. The speech received a standing ovation, and the foundation raised over $2 million that evening. More importantly, it established Rebecca as a powerful voice in the domestic violence prevention movement. William Sullivan watched his daughter's speech with immense pride, remembering the terrified woman who had called him 18 months earlier. The transformation was remarkable, but not surprising. Rebecca had always possessed inner strength. She had simply needed permission to use it. You've built something beautiful from something terrible, he told her after the event. I had help, Rebecca replied, looking around at the assembled crowd of supporters. No one overcomes abuse alone. It takes a community of people willing to stand up and say that violence is unacceptable. As they drove home from the gala, Grace sleeping peacefully in her car seat, Rebecca felt a deep sense of contentment. The road ahead was still uncertain. Single motherhood presented daily challenges, and her career in the competitive tech industry required constant growth and adaptation. But she faced the future with confidence, knowing that she had survived the worst and emerged stronger. Grace would grow up in a world where her mother's voice was respected, where her achievements were celebrated, and where she would learn that love should never involve fear or control. The story that had begun with violence and betrayal had transformed into one of justice, healing, and hope. Rebecca Sullivan had not only survived domestic violence, she had used her experience to build a better future for herself, her daughter, and countless other women who needed to know that escape was possible. As they pulled into the driveway of the house where Grace was taking her first steps and speaking her first words, Rebecca smiled at the realization that they were home not just in a physical sense, but in the deeper knowledge that they were safe, loved, and free to build whatever future they chose. The little girl who would grow up knowing both strength and kindness was proof that sometimes the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin on the darkest pages. Stories like this remind us why it's crucial to speak up against abuse and support survivors. If this story moved you or opened your eyes to workplace harassment dynamics, hit that like button to help others find it. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you witnessed similar power dynamics in your workplace? And if you want to hear more stories about justice prevailing against the odds, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. These real-life tales of accountability matter more than ever in today's world.